Ya Ali Madad, and welcome back to Ismaili Dialogue. If you enjoy these deep dives, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss out on any future episodes.
Yeah, we love making them so.
Today we are navigating a time of reflection and celebration
Yeah.
within the Ismaili community as we remember the legacy of our beloved Imam Shah Karim and welcome Prince Rahim al-Husseini Aga Khan, the 50th hereditary Imam of the Shia Ismaili Muslims.
Right.
He was appointed by Maulana Shah Karim, continuing our tradition of Nas, which essentially means the divinely inspired designation of the next Imam. So we're calling this deep dive Universal Oasis, the Aga Khan vision of a harmonious, multifaceted era. And we're going to explore what that means, not just for Ismailis, but for everyone.
Yeah, it's a vision that speaks to some very fundamental human aspirations, really. The desire for peace, understanding, and a just world.
Okay, so let's unpack this idea of a universal oasis. When you hear that phrase, what comes to mind? What's the essence of this vision?
I think, well, imagine a world where diversity is celebrated, not just tolerated, but truly appreciated as a source of richness and growth. Where ethical principles guide our actions, not just our words.
Okay.
And where compassion forms the bedrock of human interaction, bridging divides and fostering a sense of shared humanity.
It's a beautiful picture for sure. But how does this vision translate into reality? It feels almost utopian, and let's face it, the world can feel pretty far from utopian these days.
Yeah, you're right. It's a challenging vision, no doubt. But I think that's what makes it so compelling.
Right.
It's not a naive call for a world without problems, but rather a framework for navigating those problems with wisdom and compassion. And it's a vision that's being actively worked towards, not just theorized about.
That's where I think the Aga Khan Development Network comes in, right? They're actively working on the ground in some of the most challenging parts of the world to address issues like poverty, education, healthcare.
Exactly. And they do so while upholding these principles of pluralism and ethical consensus. They work with diverse communities respecting local traditions and beliefs and fostering collaboration across cultural and religious lines. Their approach is rooted in the idea that sustainable solutions require inclusivity and a deep respect for the dignity of all people, regardless of their background.
That's really fascinating. I'm thinking about our sources, and one of them mentioned that Maulana Shah Rahim Aga Khan V, as we should say,
Right.
will continue his father's legacy by really emphasizing this transformative power of ethical consensus. What exactly does that mean in practice?
Well, ethical consensus in this context goes beyond just agreeing on a set of rules. It's about recognizing our shared humanity and letting that understanding shape how we interact with one another. It's about acknowledging that despite our differences, we're all part of the same fabric of existence and that our actions have consequences for others, not just ourselves.
It makes you think about how often we get caught up in our own perspectives and fail to truly consider the perspectives of others, right?
Absolutely. And I think that's where the emphasis on ethical consensus comes in. It's a call to move beyond simply tolerating differences, to actively engaging with them, seeking to understand and appreciate the richness that diverse perspectives bring to the table.
This makes me think about this idea of resurrection, which we see mentioned a lot in the sources. It seems to have a deeper meaning within Ismaili thought than just the literal physical resurrection.
You're absolutely right. In Ismaili thought, resurrection signifies a spiritual awakening, a rise to a higher level of understanding and connection with the divine. It's about transcending the limitations of our individual perspectives and recognizing the interconnectedness of all things.
That sounds a bit like what we were just talking about, this idea of moving beyond our limited viewpoints. So is this resurrection tied to the emergence of the Imam?
Yes, absolutely. The Imam's arrival symbolizes the spiritual awakening for the community. He guides them towards a deeper understanding of their faith and their place in the world, helping them to connect with that divine spark within.
One source even went so far as to connect this resurrection to the Day of Judgment and the revelation of hidden knowledge. What does that even mean? Are we talking about the end of the world here?
Not in the literal fire and brimstone sense.
Okay.
The Day of Judgment in this context is more about a period of accountability, a time when truth is revealed and falsehood is exposed. It's about recognizing the true nature of reality and aligning our actions with those divine principles we were discussing earlier.
Okay, so maybe less about the world ending and more about our individual ways of seeing the world being challenged and transformed.
That's a great way to put it. It's about shedding those limiting beliefs and preconceptions that keep us from seeing the world clearly and embracing a more expansive, compassionate perspective.
I'm beginning to see how all these concepts, ethical consensus, resurrection, the Imam's guidance, are all woven together in this vision of the universal oasis. They're all pointing towards a deeper understanding of ourselves and our connection to something larger than ourselves.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that we're not isolated individuals, but part of an intricate web of life, and that our actions have ripple effects that extend far beyond our immediate sphere.
It's a powerful thought. I think it's one that resonates deeply, even for people who may not be familiar with Ismaili thought. Because at the end of the day, who doesn't long for a world where we treat each other with kindness, fairness, and understanding?
I think you've hit the nail on the head. This vision of the universal oasis speaks to a fundamental human yearning for a world that reflects the best of who we are.
Right.
And it offers a path, a way of being in the world that can help us move closer to that ideal.
That's a fantastic place to pause for a moment and let our listeners absorb all of this. We've covered a lot of ground, from the passing of Imam Shah Karim to the vision of his successor and this idea of the universal oasis. When we come back in part 2, I'm really interested in delving deeper into the role of the Imam. We've touched on it briefly, but I think there's so much more to explore there. How does the Imam actually guide the community towards this spiritual awakening? What does that look like in practice? Stay tuned, because we'll be unpacking all of that and more when we return to the deep dive.
Welcome back to the deep dive. In the first part, we started to explore this idea of the universal oasis, a vision for a world rooted in pluralism, ethical consensus, and compassion. And you raised a really interesting question about the role of the Imam in all of this.
Yeah, well, it seemed like the Imam was a central figure in this vision, right? As this guide leading the community towards a spiritual awakening. But I have to admit, that concept of spiritual awakening still feels a bit fuzzy to me. What does it actually look like?
That's a great question, and one that's been pondered by philosophers and mystics for centuries, really. It's not something that's easily captured in words, but perhaps we can approach it through a metaphor. Imagine a seed buried deep within the earth.
Okay.
It has the potential to grow into a beautiful tree, but it needs the right conditions to flourish: sunlight, water, nourishment.
Okay, following you so far. So the seed is like our inner potential, our capacity for spiritual growth.
Exactly, and the Imam in this metaphor acts like the gardener.
Okay.
He tends to samam the soil, providing the guidance, knowledge, and inspiration that allows that seed to sprout and grow.
So the Imam's role isn't to force this growth, but to create the right conditions for it to happen naturally.
Precisely. It's about nurturing those qualities of compassion, wisdom, and understanding that already exist within us, but which might lie dormant without the right kind of support.
That makes sense. It's like providing the right tools and guidance to help us on our own individual journeys of self-discovery. But I'm curious, how does the Imam actually do this? What are the practical ways in which he guides the community?
Well, one way is through the interpretation and explanation of religious texts.
Okay.
The Imam helps to uncover the deeper esoteric meanings hidden within these texts, revealing insights that might not be immediately apparent to the casual reader.
Okay, so it's about going beyond the literal meaning of the words and finding those hidden layers of wisdom.
Exactly. It's about understanding the symbolic language, the metaphors and allegories that point towards profound truths about the nature of reality and our place within it.
I'm remembering how we talked about resurrection in the last part, and how it had this deeper meaning beyond just the physical body coming back to life. It sounds like this kind of textual interpretation could be a way of experiencing that resurrection in a more personal, spiritual sense.
That's a very insightful connection. You're absolutely right. By understanding the deeper meaning of these texts, we can begin to shift our perspectives, challenge our limiting beliefs, and awaken to a new way of seeing the world.
So it's about going beyond just reading the words on a page and actually internalizing those teachings, letting them transform us from the inside out.
Exactly. It's about that aha moment where something clicks into place and you suddenly understand something at a deeper level. And those moments can be incredibly transformative, leading to profound personal growth and a heightened sense of purpose.
This is starting to make a lot more sense to me now. It's not just about intellectual knowledge, but about integrating those teachings into our lives, letting them shape how we think, feel, and act in the world.
Precisely. And the Imam's guidance is essential in this process.
Right.
He helps us to navigate the complexities of these teachings, to discern the truth from falsehood, and to apply those truths in a way that is meaningful and relevant to our lives.
You know, it's interesting because we've been talking a lot about the Imam's role within the Ismaili community, but it seems like this idea of spiritual guidance, this quest for deeper meaning and understanding, is something that resonates with people from all walks of life.
You're absolutely right. This desire for spiritual awakening, for transcending the limitations of our egocentric perspective and connecting with something larger than ourselves, is a universal human yearning.
It makes you wonder if this vision of the universal oasis isn't just for Ismailis, but for everyone seeking to build a more compassionate and just world.
I think that's a very powerful point. While the concept of the Imam is specific to Ismaili thought, the principles it embodies, compassion, wisdom, ethical conduct, serving to humanity, these are universal values that transcend any particular religion or belief system.
So even if someone doesn't believe in the concept of an Imam, they can still find inspiration and guidance in these principles. They can still embark on their own journey of spiritual growth and contribute to creating a more harmonious world.
Absolutely. I think that's the beauty of this vision. It speaks to something deep within the human spirit, regardless of one's background or beliefs. It's a call to awaken to our interconnectedness, to cultivate those qualities of compassion and understanding that allow us to see each other as fellow travelers on this journey of life.
Okay, I'm really starting to grasp the depth and complexity of this vision now. We've explored how the Imam guides the community, the transformative power of spiritual awakening, and how these principles resonate with people from all walks of life. But I'm thinking about all the challenges we face in the world today: conflict, poverty, climate change. How does this vision of the universal oasis, with its emphasis on spiritual growth, actually translate into action on the ground?
That's a fantastic question, and it's one we're going to delve into in the final part of our deep dive. We'll explore how these principles of pluralism, ethical consensus, and compassion can be put into practice to create a more just and sustainable world for everyone.
This is getting me really excited to hear more. Don't go anywhere, listeners, because we'll be back soon with part 3 of the deep dive, where we'll unpack how this vision can make a real difference in the world. Welcome back to the deep dive. We've been exploring this concept of the universal oasis, a vision for a world where pluralism and ethical consensus guide our actions, and compassion connects us all. It's a beautiful vision, but in the last part I was left wondering how we actually bridge the gap between these lofty ideals and the very real problems facing our world today.
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It's easy to get caught up in the beauty of a vision, but the real test is how it translates into concrete action. You know, how it helps us grapple with issues like poverty, injustice, and environmental degradation.
Exactly. We're not just talking about creating a feel-good utopia here. We're talking about tackling some of the most complex and challenging issues of our time.
Absolutely. And I think that's where the power of this vision lies. It's not about escaping from the world's problems, but about equipping ourselves with the tools and perspectives needed to confront them head on.
Okay, so how does that actually work? How do we take these principles of pluralism, ethical consensus, and compassion and apply them in a way that makes a tangible difference?
Well, think back to what we discussed earlier about the Aga Khan Development Network. They're working on the ground in over 30 countries, and their approach is a great example of how these principles can be put into action.
You're talking about how they work with diverse communities, respecting local traditions, and focusing on sustainable development?
Precisely. They understand that true progress can't be imposed from the outside. It has to be rooted in the needs and aspirations of the communities themselves. And that means taking a pluralistic approach, recognizing the value of diverse perspectives, and finding solutions that work for everyone involved.
That makes a lot of sense. It's not about coming in with a one-size-fits-all solution, but about tailoring approaches to specific contexts and working collaboratively with the people who are most affected by these issues.
Exactly. And that's where ethical consensus comes in. It's about engaging in dialogue, building trust, and finding common ground, even when there are disagreements. It's about recognizing that we're all in this together, and that the only way to create lasting change is through cooperation and mutual respect.
Okay, so we've got pluralism and ethical consensus as guiding principles. But what about compassion? Where does that fit into all of this?
Compassion is the driving force, the fuel that motivates us to act. It's what allows us to see beyond our own self-interest and recognize the shared humanity that connects us all.
It's about moving beyond just understanding the problem intellectually and actually feeling a sense of responsibility to do something about it right.
You've got it. It's about that empathy that allows us to step into the shoes of another and see the world through their eyes. And that empathy can be a powerful motivator for change. It's what drives us to work towards a world where everyone has the opportunity to live a life of dignity and fulfillment.
This is all starting to click into place for me. These
Yeah.
principles aren't just abstract ideals. They're practical tools that can guide us towards building a better world.
Absolutely. And it's not just about large-scale projects or institutional change. It's about the choices we make every day in our own lives.
What do you mean by that? How can we as individuals bring this vision of the universal oasis into our daily actions?
It can be as simple as choosing to buy fair trade coffee, volunteering our time at a local charity, or speaking out against injustice when we see it.
So it's about aligning our actions with our values, making conscious choices that contribute to the well-being of others and the planet.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that we all have a role to play in creating a more just and compassionate world, no matter how small our actions may seem.
I think that's a really empowering message. It can feel overwhelming to think about all the problems in the world, but remembering that we each have the power to make a difference, even in small ways, can be a source of hope and motivation.
I agree. And it's not just about the impact we have on the world around us, it's also about the impact these actions have on ourselves. When we act with compassion, when we strive to live in accordance with our values, it brings a sense of meaning and purpose to our lives.
I've experienced that myself. When I make the effort to connect with others to help out where I contain, it brings a feeling of fulfillment that's hard to describe.
It's like that sense of resurrection we talked about earlier, that spiritual awakening that comes from connecting with something larger than ourselves. It's a journey of growth and transformation that enriches not only our own lives, but the lives of those around us.
This has been such an illuminating conversation. We've covered a lot of ground, from the passing of Imam Shah Karim to the vision of his successor and the practical implications of this universal oasis concept. I think this deep dive has given us a lot to think about and hopefully inspired us to find ways to bring these principles into our own lives.
It has for me, for sure, and it's been a pleasure exploring these ideas with you.
And for our listeners, we hope this deep dive has sparked some reflection and inspired you to consider how you can bring these principles of pluralism, ethical consensus, and compassion into your own lives. Remember, the universal oasis begins within each of us. Yahweh.